When we think of terror attacks, names like 9/11s or Mumbai immediately come to mind. But across the world, lesser-known horrors have left behind deep scars, mass casualties, shockwaves of fear, and global consequences. These are the devastating terror attacks most people don't know about until now. Wagala Massacre at Kenya in 1984. In 1984, one of the darkest and most overlooked tragedies in Kenya's history unfolded in Wajir County, a remote and arid region in the country's northeast. Under the guise of a security operation, Kenyan government forces launched a crackdown against members of the ethnic Somali Dagodia community. What began as a military roundup quickly turned into a coordinated act of mass brutality. More than 5,000 Somali men were forcibly gathered at the Wagala airstrip. Stripped of their dignity, they were held under the scorching sun without access to food, water, or shelter for days. Survivors later recalled being beaten, tortured, and interrogated without cause. Many died from dehydration, exhaustion, or injuries, while others were executed outright. Reports suggest that over 1,000 people were killed, their bodies dumped or buried in unmarked mass graves across the barren landscape. The Kenyan government, at the time, downplayed the massacre by labeling it a minor tribal clash, effectively silencing public inquiry for years. Witnesses were intimidated, and the incident faded from national memory, buried under decades of silence and state denial. It wasn't until much later, through persistent efforts by human rights groups and survivors, that the truth began to surface. Decades after the massacre, official acknowledgement slowly emerged, but justice remained elusive. Even today, many Kenyans are unaware of the full scale of what happened in Wagala, a massacre that not only scarred a community but also exposed the dangers of unchecked power and forgotten lives. Halabja chemical attack at Iraq in 1988. In March 1988, the town of Halabja in northern Iraq became the site of one of the most horrifying chemical attacks ever carried out against civilians. Located in the Kurdish region near the Iranian border, Halabja was home to tens of thousands of people, most of them ethnic Kurds. As part of the wider Anfal Campania brutal military operation aimed at crushing Kurdish resistance, Iraqi forces under Saddam Hussein's regime unleashed a deadly and calculated assault. Without warning, the Iraqi military dropped a mixture of chemical agents, including sarin, taboon, and mustard gas, over the town. The impact was immediate and catastrophic. Within minutes, thousands of people, many of them women and children, collapsed and died in the streets. Homes became death traps as the toxic gases seeped through windows and doors. An estimated 5,000 people were killed in just a few hours, while tens of thousands more were injured, many suffering long-term effects such as cancer, respiratory disease, and birth defects. What made the Halabja attack particularly devastating was not just its scale, but its cold, strategic intent. It was a message to all Kurdish populations that defiance would be met with extermination. Despite overwhelming evidence and international condemnation, accountability was delayed for years. Iraq's use of chemical weapons was largely ignored by global powers at the time, as political interests overshadowed humanitarian outrage. Today, Halabja stands not only as a symbol of Kurdish suffering, but as a grim reminder of how chemical warfare can be turned against innocent civilians with almost no immediate consequences. The scars left by that day are still visible, both in the physical health of survivors and in the collective memory of a people who were attacked by their own government. Urumqi bus bombings at China in 1997. In early 1997, the city of Urumqi, the capital of China's Xinjiang region, was rocked by a coordinated series of deadly bombings that left residents shaken and authorities on high alert. Urumqi, home to a large population of Uyghur Muslims, had long been a focal point of ethnic tensions and growing unrest fueled by calls for autonomy and dissatisfaction with Beijing's rule. The attacks took place during the busy Lunar New Year period, when the city was filled with civilians traveling and celebrating. A series of timed explosions ripped through public buses, killing 9 people and injuring over 60 others. The bombings were carried out with crude yet effective devices planted in crowded passenger areas, maximizing casualties and spreading panic across the city. Authorities quickly attributed the attacks to separatist elements within the Uyghur community, labeling them acts of terrorism linked to the East Turkestan independence movement. Although no group officially claimed responsibility, the Chinese government launched a swift and severe crackdown, Dozens of Uyghur suspects were detained, and several were publicly executed in the months that followed as a demonstration of state control. What followed was a significant escalation in state surveillance, militarization, and restrictions across Xinjiang. The bus bombings became a turning point used as a justification for long-term policies targeting the Uyghur population under the guise of anti-terrorism. While the attack itself faded from public conversation, its aftermath marked the beginning of intensified repression that would continue to evolve into the controversial mass surveillance and detention systems seen in the region today. The 1,997 Urumqi bus bombings may not have resulted in the highest death toll, but they played a pivotal role in shaping the Chinese government's security strategy and its relationship with the region's ethnic minorities. For many, they signaled the start of a much darker chapter in Xinjiang's history. Myitkyina massacre at Myanmar in 1992, in the remote and mountainous Kachin state of northern Myanmar. A brutal and largely undocumented massacre unfolded in 1992, far from the eyes of the global media. The town of Myitkyina, long a flashpoint in the civil conflict between the Myanmar military, known as the Tatmadaw, and the Kachin Independence Army, KIA, became the setting for a military atrocity aimed not at soldiers, but at civilians caught in the crossfire. As part of an aggressive counterinsurgency campaign, Tatmadaw troops entered the region under the pretext of rooting out rebel fighters. But instead of engaging the KIA directly, the military reportedly rounded up civilians mainly, Kachin villagers suspecting them of sympathizing with the rebels. What followed was a wave of violence. Men were detained and tortured, women were subjected to rape and abuse, and entire families were forced from their homes. Eyewitness reports describe mass executions, the destruction of villages, and the disappearance of hundreds. Reliable figures are hard to come by due to strict government censorship and the complete absence of international media. However, independent human rights groups have estimated that over 300 people were killed during the Myitkyina operation, with many more displaced and unaccounted for. The Myanmar government never acknowledged the massacre, and it remains officially undocumented within the country's historical narrative. The Myitkyina massacre exemplifies the brutal tactics used by the military against ethnic minorities, long before the Rohingya crisis brought Myanmar's human rights abuses into the global spotlight. For the people of Kachin State, the events of 1,992 are a deep wound, a symbol of suffering, silenced by decades of impunity. To this day, no one has been held accountable, and the victims' names are known only within their shattered communities. Besides school bombing, at Pakistan in 2009, a devastating and chilling attack targeted one of society's most vulnerable group school children. In the town of Lower Deer, located in Pakistan's Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province, a suicide bomber struck the Basaid primary school during an early morning assembly. The attack, believed to be carried out by the Tehrik-i-Taliban Pakistan, TTP, resulted in the deaths of at least 14 children and injured many more. The school, like many in the region, had recently reopened after security forces had regained control from militant groups. But the calm was short-lived. By targeting a gathering of young students, the attackers aimed to send a brutal message: education, especially when supported by the state, was a threat to their ideology. The fact that the majority of the victims were children underscored the extreme and calculated cruelty behind the bombing. The incident instilled a deep sense of fear throughout the province. Parents were terrified to send their children back to school, and many institutions were forced to shut down temporarily. The bombing wasn't just an act of terror, it was a psychological assault on families trying to return to normal life after years of conflict. It also reflected a broader trend of extremist violence directed specifically at schools, teachers, and female students across Pakistan's tribal areas and northwest regions. While the attack on Basaid School did not receive widespread international media attention at the time, it marked a grim precursor to later tragedies, such as the 2014 Army Public School massacre in Peshawar. It highlighted a systematic campaign by militant groups to sabotage education and instill long-term fear in the hearts of communities striving for progress. Ankara Peace, rally bombing at Turkey in 2015. On the 10th of October, 2015, the heart of Turkey's capital city was shattered by the deadliest terror attack in the nation's modern history. Thousands had gathered in Ankara to take part in a peaceful demonstration organized by labor unions, civil society groups, and pro-Kurdish activists. Their message was simple: demand peace and denounce the rising tide of violence in Turkey's southeast. But moments before the rally was set to begin, two suicide bombers detonated themselves in the crowd. The twin explosions killed 109 people and injured more than 500. The blasts turned a hopeful event into a scene of horror, with bodies strewn across the plaza and survivors desperately seeking help. Investigators later linked the attackers to the Islamic State, and while the group did not officially claim responsibility, the planning and execution bore the hallmarks of ISIS-affiliated operatives already active in the region. The Ankara bombing did far more than inflict mass casualties. It triggered a wave of national grief, political controversy, and accusations of security negligence. Many critics questioned how such a large-scale attack could happen in the capital, especially during a publicly announced event. Others pointed to the government's hostile stance toward Kurdish groups and blamed years of polarization for creating the conditions in which such violence could thrive. In the wake of the bombing, Turkey's already fragile political landscape became even more volatile. Elections were just weeks away, and the attack fueled deep divisions between parties, ethnic groups, and ideologies. Security was ramped up nationwide, but the public's trust in government institutions continued to erode. Though the Ankara peace rally bombing was one of the most tragic events in Turkey's recent history, it remains relatively unknown to much of the world. For those who lived through it, however, it was a turning point where the pursuit of peace was answered not with dialogue, but with unspeakable violence. Bali nightclub bombing in 2005. 3 years after the devastating 2002 Bali bombings, Indonesia was once again rocked by terror. On the 1st of October, 2005, a series of coordinated suicide attacks targeted tourist-packed restaurants in Jimbaran Bay and Kutatwo, of Bali's most popular nightlife and dining areas. These bombings came as a grim reminder that the island, and indeed the region, remained vulnerable to extremist violence despite heightened security efforts. The attackers struck almost simultaneously, blending into the crowds before detonating explosive vests inside busy venues. The result was chaos. 20 people were killed, and more than 100 were injured. Many of them foreign tourists. Unlike the earlier attack that used car bombs, this time the militants relied on human bombs, individuals trained and groomed for targeted suicide missions in public spaces. The perpetrators were linked to Jamaah Islamiyah, the same extremist group behind the 2002 Bali attack, with direct ties to Al-Qaeda. Their motive remained the same: to destabilize the region, punish Western presence in Southeast Asia, and cripple Indonesia's tourism economy. The symbolic timing just ahead of the 2005 Ramadan season further underscored their desire to turn a moment of peace into one of fear. What made this second Bali bombing particularly disturbing was how easily it pierced through existing security measures. Despite years of international cooperation, training, and intelligence upgrades, the attackers had once again succeeded in striking the heart of one of Asia's most visited destinations. Yet outside of Indonesia and Australia, this second bombing is often forgotten, overshadowed by the larger-scale 2002 tragedy. But for many, it was a harsh confirmation that the threat hadn't disappeared. It had merely evolved. The 2005 attack served as a sobering warning. Counter-terror efforts must be continuous, adaptive, and grounded in strong regional cooperation, or they risk falling behind a threat that never truly goes away. Baga massacre at Nigeria in 2015. In January 2015, the small fishing town of Baga, located near the shores of Lake Chad in northeastern Nigeria, became the site of one of the deadliest terror attacks ever carried out by Boko Haram. While international headlines focused on the Charlie Hebdo shootings in Paris that occurred just days earlier, a far greater human tragedy was unfolding in near silence. Boko Haram militants launched a full-scale assault on Baga and surrounding villages, systematically burning homes, executing residents, and forcing thousands to flee into the wilderness. Eyewitnesses described the attack as relentless, with gunmen firing indiscriminately and entire communities razed to the ground. Over a period of 4 days, an estimated 2,000 people were killed, though exact numbers remain uncertain due to the remoteness of the region and the lack of immediate government access. The massacre was not just about territorial control. It was meant to instill pure terror. Men, women, and children were slaughtered without distinction. Survivors told stories of mass executions, bodies left unburied, and entire families erased overnight. Many fled across the border into Chad, walking for days without food, water, or shelter. What made the Baga massacre particularly disturbing was the near absence of global outrage. Media coverage was minimal, and international governments offered little response beyond generic condemnations. The Nigerian military was heavily criticized for its slow and ineffective reaction, with reports suggesting that soldiers stationed in the area abandoned their posts in the face of the onslaught. To this day, the massacre remains one of the most horrifying yet least acknowledged mass killings in modern African history. For the people of Baga, justice has never arrived. The town, once a vibrant hub for trade and fishing, was reduced to ashes. And while Boko Haram continues to wreak havoc across Nigeria and its neighbors, the memory of Baga lingers as a grim symbol of what happens when the world looks away. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you gained some knowledge, then please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more valuable content. Until then, goodbye.